Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for attending our presentation on hazardous gases on domestic commercial vessels. My name is Desley Thompson and I'm an Advisor Safety Liaison, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander here at the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, AMSA. On behalf of the team and AMSA, we're excited to have you here as we explore the risks of hazardous gases and how to manage those risks as part of your vessel's operation. Before I get into the housekeeping and introductions, I'd like to acknowledge country. In the spirit of reconciliation, we here at the Australian Maritime Safety would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and also acknowledge connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and also extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here on the webinar today. I'm actually on Gimmoy Wallabara Yidinji country here in Cairns, and I also acknowledge them as my local traditional custodians. Please be aware of, just some housekeeping before we get into the presentation. Please be aware of the 30-second delay. Today's webinar is being recorded and you will receive a link to the webinar afterwards. If you'd like to turn on live captioning, please do so by clicking the captions at the top of your Teams windows. If you have any questions, simply click on the Q&A icon and type in your question, and one of our AMSA experts will answer them along the way. You can also choose to post questions anonymously too. We'll make sure we respond to all questions either during the webinar or afterwards. Make sure you give us a thumbs up if you'd like to see a question answered too. We'll also ask you to answer a poll during the presentation so people can respond to this. Please respond to this on this one as well. We also ask you complete a short survey at the end of the session to help ensure our webinars meets your needs. Now I'd like to introduce my colleagues who will co-host this presentation with me. Anita Markovsky, AMSA's Advisor Safety Liaison based in Sydney, New South Wales, and Marco Tesora, AMSA's Senior Marine Surveyor, who's based in Coffs Harbour, also in New South Wales. I'll hand over to Anita now to begin the presentation.
Thanks, Desley, and thank you to everyone who is attending today. Today we'll be covering the topics listed in the slide as we explore hazardous gases found on vessels and guide you in managing the risks they pose in your operations. Just prior to continuing with the presentation, we would like to get an idea of just how many of you already have assessed the hazardous gases on your vessel and documented the controls in your safety management system. If you could give an answer to the question in the Q&A chat, that would be great. If you haven't, we hope that today's presentation and our website information give you a few ideas to get started. Today's presentation, we will focus on three main gases that can be found on domestic commercial vessels. They are carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulphide, and carbon dioxide. These gases are a potential risk and should be considered when carrying out the risk assessment of your operation and forms part of your vessel's safety management system. Incidents involving hazardous gases on vessels are a concern not only for the known gases that are stored on your vessel, but also gases that are created on board as waste or as a byproduct of operations such as from sewerage systems, holding tanks, and the combustion of fuels. We will explore what each of these hazardous gases are, how they can affect your health and impair your cognitive abilities, what are the signs and symptoms, and where they are found or generated on vessels, and how to control them to reduce injuries. You can also follow a link shared in the chat for additional information on hazardous gases. Let's get started. When it comes to hazardous gases on vessels, there are certain requirements under Marine Order 504 that owners, masters and crew need to be aware of and comply with. These include conducting a risk assessment to identify, assess, control, monitor hazards in your operations. Then you need to record that risk assessment in your safety management system. Develop emergency procedures that address the risk and management of hazardous gases, and provide induction and training crew to identify and manage those risks. Schedule out and carry out regular maintenance of sewerage and plumbing systems, and ensure that the vessel has adequate ventilation and airflow in toilets and confined spaces. These requirements apply to all vessel classes. Okay, let's start with carbon monoxide. Also known as CO, carbon monoxide is a colourless, odourless, and flammable and poisonous gas. It's produced by the burning of carbon-based fuels like wood, gas, petrol, or coal. And it depletes oxygen in the blood and can cause tissue and organ damage. Common sources of carbon monoxide on vessels include from engine exhausts. Carbon monoxide tends to enter the vessel and accumulate near the swim deck area, which is closest to the engine exhaust and accumulates there when the vessel is idling or moving slowly. The wind direction can also push that gas into the cabin. This gas can be produced on board as well. When you use fuel burning appliances like gas heaters, portable generators, barbecues, or power tools used in enclosed spaces and poorly ventilated areas, like in a cabin or engine room. And carbon monoxide can also enter your vessel by being in close proximity or tied to another vessel that are generating the gas from their engine exhaust fumes too. Just because you are outdoors, you will still need to be aware of carbon monoxide and how it can accumulate around you. Carbon monoxide is highly toxic to people, and poisoning occurs when there is a buildup in the blood. When too much carbon monoxide is in the air and is inhaled, it replaces oxygen in your red blood cells. Exposure to carbon monoxide can start with milder symptoms like headaches, dizziness, eye irritation, nausea and vomiting. But with prolonged exposure and high concentrations, symptoms can quickly escalate to fainting, loss of consciousness, seizures, respiratory failure, permanent brain injury, and even death. People affected by carbon monoxide poisoning can often look like they are seasick or drunk, and this can delay receiving treatment. Failure to identify and treat carbon monoxide poisoning can result in permanent damage and death. Now we can start talking about how we can manage carbon monoxide on our vessels to reduce exposure and injuries. Firstly, avoid being seated near or standing close to running engines or exhaust systems, particularly when the vessel is idling or moving slowly. Depending on the wind and other conditions, the gas can re-enter the vessel at high concentrations. Make sure passengers do not spend a lot of time on the swimming deck and ladder at the rear of the vessel due to nearby exhaust fumes. Power tools, portable generators, gas heaters, or barbecues, whether they are fueled by LPG, charcoal bricks, or wood, must only be used outside and never inside the vessel. Also consider other factors like wind direction when using carbon monoxide producing appliances and tools. Ensure the fumes they generate do not re-enter the cabin or confined spaces. And keep fumes away from open windows and cabin doors. Carbon monoxide is also highly flammable and can ignite easily when in close proximity to ignition sources, such as flames or electrical power points. Any sources that generate a spark. Monitor and service equipment regularly to make sure that there are no leaks, and check equipment as part of your pre-start routines. You can consider installing gas detection monitors so you are alerted when carbon monoxide and other hazardous gases are in the air. And lastly, get fresh air. If passengers and crew are feeling sick and showing signs of carbon monoxide poisoning, get them outside of the cabin and into the fresh air. On the screen, we have developed a risk assessment example to demonstrate how a simple risk assessment can look like. Masters and crew should work together to identify where the gas is likely to be present and the sources, and note it in the risks column. List all the control measures you will put in place to eliminate or reduce the risk of exposure to the gas, and note down who is responsible to carry out the tasks or actions listed in the column. The last column is where you can note any changes to your plan. As with all examples shown throughout this presentation, this is an example only and may not be applicable to your operation, but it does give you a starting point if you are unsure where to start. Now I wanted to highlight an incident where carbon monoxide caused a fatality on a vessel. In 2016, a 23-year-old died from carbon monoxide poisoning, moored in Sydney Harbour. The victim was an engineer, naval architect, and an experienced sailor with many years' experience. When police found the young victim, the gas stove was found in the on position. The victim's girlfriend, who was also on board the vessel, was in a very disorientated and in a confused state. She was taken to hospital in a serious condition and treated for carbon monoxide poisoning, and luckily survived the incident. Now I'd like to share a 4-minute video produced by Marine and Safety Tasmania on the dangers of carbon monoxide poisoning when boating.
The boating lifestyle brings plenty of rewards, but it's not without some elements of risk. Boats by their nature are sealed vessels, good at keeping water on the outside, but equally good at keeping things like unwanted gases inside. The most dangerous of these is carbon monoxide, a colourless, odourless, poisonous gas produced whenever something burns.
The problem we have with carbon monoxide and boating is that it is present as something we can't smell, we can't taste, and it's produced by internal combustion engines of any sort, including diesels, but more likely from petrol engines. And it's also produced wherever you've got a flame, so things like LP gas fridges can produce carbon monoxide.
CO is about the same weight as air, and the gas will fill the internal spaces of a boat, typically the places where people will be.
Carbon monoxide is a silent killer, and it substitutes for oxygen in the human body and in all mammals. And by doing so, it tricks the body into thinking you've got oxygen being carried around, when in fact it's a poisonous substance that builds up in your system progressively, and it poisons you right through from the blood with your hemoglobin attaching to it instead of oxygen and stopping oxygen carriage, into your muscles, your heart, your brain, and by the time it soaks right through your system in a large dose, you'll be anaesthetised, and then finally the whole body gets suppressed and you have a cardiac arrest, so you die from it.
Early symptoms include an impairment of thought processes and a feeling of slowing down that's followed by severe intoxication and the inability to escape the danger. Tragically, victims often don't know they're in trouble until it's too late.
We've had cases where a petrol engine inside the boat had a connection between it and the passenger compartment, and the fumes built up inside the boat. People couldn't smell them. Eventually they all went off to sleep, and the boat was found doing left turns and rescued by police and treated at the hospital. We've seen other cases where people have had an LP gas fridge indoors, and it's built up in the boat cabin, and people have just gone off to sleep and never woken up.
Most of our boats have at least one source of CO, the fridge, the engine, maybe a generator. The critical thing is to make sure that the gas makes its way overboard and doesn't collect in the boat. These portable generators are a popular and easily way to get power on board, but they do need to be used with care. A carbon monoxide detector is a cheap and simple way to protect your crew.
Marine-specific detectors are available, but whatever type you choose, it's better to have one than not.
They're able to be purchased from most hardware stores for around about $40 to $50, and they should be placed where you'd place a normal smoke detector. And in boats, probably in the roof of the cabin where you have sleeping area. And this will trigger and go off at 70 parts per million in the surrounding atmosphere, or if there's a rapid rise in carbon monoxide. Generally at 70 parts per million, a human would have about 20 minutes of competence to be able to get out of that environment.
Carbon monoxide can get trapped inside your boat when travelling, so it's a good idea to keep some fresh air flowing.
When you drive it into the wind, the fumes and exhaust that's coming out of the engine actually sort of sucks up in here. So if you are doing 3 hours of travelling like we are today, it's very important that you get a bit of fresh air blowing through the cab, lest you might actually expire in here.
One example, coming back from Rottnest Island, storm cover's up, all bar the stern storm cover, and going slow because of weather. And what's happened is turbulence has brought all of the engine fumes into the boat, and the people were found unconscious in the Swan River and then had to be resuscitated and brought down to hospital for treatment.
And tragically, there have been fatal cases in other parts of the country in recent times. Carbon monoxide is a danger that every skipper needs to be aware of.
It's a problem that's there, and obviously we've had a tragedy recently, and that's brought this subject up to attention, and it's a matter of people being aware of the risks and making sure they mitigate those risks. As with anything with boating, you just got to be smart about what you do.
Thanks to Marine and Safety Tasmania for producing that video, which really highlights just how dangerous and prevalent carbon monoxide is on vessels. Now, let's explore another gas that is generated in vessels, hydrogen sulphide. Hydrogen sulphide, also known as H2S, is a colourless, flammable, corrosive and poisonous gas that smells like rotten eggs. It is produced naturally from decaying organic matter like fish or sewage wastes. It is heavier than air, causing the gas to accumulate and travel in low-lying areas on board. So what are the health risks? Well, in low concentrations, it can cause irritation to the eyes, nose, throat, as well as cause headaches, dizziness and nausea. However, in high concentrations, it can cause rapid unconsciousness, respiratory failure and death within minutes. Let's take a look at some of the common symptoms and signs at low concentrations. They are headache, dizziness, staggering, sudden collapse, acute eye, nose and throat irritations, shortness of breath, tightness in the chest, wheezing, and paralysis of the olfactory nerve, which is a loss of smell and taste. This gas can quickly cause an inability to smell it. This characteristic removes a critical warning sign for exposure and increases the risk of serious harm, because you think you are safe when the foul smell goes away, but in fact all this means is that the poisonous gas is at very high levels and is already affecting your health. So if you detect a rotten egg smell, immediately move away from that area, get outside into the fresh air and report it to the crew. High concentrations of this poisonous gas can cause convulsions, pulmonary edema, which is a buildup of fluid in the lungs. You can fall into a coma, and death. In very high concentrations, this can happen almost instantly. Let's look at where hydrogen sulphide can be found in vessels. Sewage systems, plumbing, bilge systems, oily water tanks and fuel tanks, but it is commonly produced in sewage systems and black water tanks. This gas will continue to build in sewage tanks until they are emptied. In fishing vessels, hydrogen sulphide can also be produced by rotting fish, fish waste, or offal in confined areas and tanks. In low-lying areas or enclosed areas, because the gas is actually heavier than air and can travel along the ground, it collects in low-lying and enclosed spaces with poor airflow. And be aware of ignition sources and sparks. Hydrogen sulphide is highly flammable. It can easily ignite and explode and must be kept away from ignition sources or sparks. Now that we know what hydrogen sulphide is, how it can harm people, and where it can be found on vessels, let's look at some things you can do to manage and control this hazard on your vessels. Firstly, complete a thorough risk assessment and make sure crew are aware of the safety measures in place. Pump out sewage tanks after each voyage or charter. Check that sewage tanks are empty prior to commencing each voyage and empty them if they contain waste. Include the monitoring, maintenance and servicing of sewerage and plumbing systems in your vessel risk assessment as part of your safety management system. And ensure toilets, bathrooms are well ventilated. Make sure crew are aware of hydrogen sulphide and other hazardous gases on board in the safety induction. Include procedures to manage situations where these gases are detected in the vessel's emergency plan and procedures. Let the master know as soon as a rotten egg smell is first detected and start your emergency procedures. Hydrogen sulphide will accumulate on lower sections in the vessels because it is heavier than air. So stay clear of these zones and move to an open area in an emergency. Watch what's happening around you and be aware of the possibility of inhaling hazardous gases when dealing with incidents on board. Do not put yourself and your crew in danger when helping others. If someone has collapsed inside from any hazardous gases, go outside and call 000 hazmat for help. On screen, you will see a simple example risk assessment where you can list the risks, document the controls, and assign actions to the master and crew. Incidents involving hazardous gases. I wanted to highlight one in particular that occurred in 2019 on the Lady Rose. It was chartered by a group of 27 passengers for a private function in Sydney Harbour. Not long after the voyage commenced, passengers began complaining about a foul, rotten egg smell to the crew, but this was not relayed to the master until later. During the charter, one of the passengers was noticed as missing, and after a short search was found in an unresponsive state in a toilet cubicle on board the vessel. Emergency services were called and attended, however, the passenger was unable to be revived. The investigation found that it was likely the passenger was overcome by exposure to hydrogen sulphide that had permeated into the toilet cubicle through a faulty waterless hand basin trap. This incident highlights the critical risks of poor system design and inadequate maintenance. Key findings from the investigation found that the vessel had serious safety deficiencies, including faulty sewage piping and ventilation, poor maintenance and wastewater systems, failure to follow the vessel's safety management system, including pre-departure checks. Other passengers reported the strange smell during the cruise, but this was not relayed to the master at first. The voyage had started its journey with partially full sewage tanks from the previous voyage 7 days prior. You can read the Office of Transport Safety Investigations report into the Lady Rose fatality by clicking on the link we have on the useful resources slide towards the end of this presentation. Another tragic incident involving hydrogen sulphide, this time in Sabah Port, Malaysia, caused the death of 3 crew members and injuries to 3 others. The first victim was opening the fish storage chamber to unload the catch, but collapsed. A second victim then went into the chamber to help their workmate, but also collapsed. A similar outcome happened to the subsequent victims until one of them managed to climb out of the chamber and called out for help. Workers managed to pull out the victims using a rope, but medical staff confirmed that 2 had died at the scene. Other victims were taken to hospital for treatment, but 1 was later confirmed to have died a few hours later, all from hydrogen sulphide poisoning. This tragic incident shows just how quickly hydrogen sulphide poisons people, and in some instances, it takes a matter of seconds. Now let's look at carbon dioxide. Unlike the 2 previous gases, carbon dioxide, or more commonly known as CO2, is generally found on vessels stored in cylinders and not generated on board. It is a naturally occurring gas and is commonly stored in cylinders on vessels. It's heavier than air and it can accumulate along the ground. Like carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide is colourless, tasteless, and odourless. We exhale carbon dioxide, and in low quantities, it does not pose a risk to people. However, a few minutes exposure to high concentrations of carbon dioxide can be fatal, particularly if a person collapses to the floor or is working in low-lying areas in the vessel where the gas accumulates. Acute carbon dioxide poisoning stops the respiratory and circulatory systems in the body, which can cause a fast heart rate, cardiac arrhythmias, and impaired consciousness. More serious symptoms of high exposure to carbon dioxide are convulsions, coma, asphyxiation, and death. Sources on vessels. CO2 cylinders are commonly used in the hospitality industry to carbonate drinks, such as on-tap beverages and post-mix for soft drinks. Tourism, domestic commercial vessel operators are likely to have CO2 cylinders on board. They are usually stored in small cupboards or confined spaces, and if there is a leak, gas emissions can build up and pose a serious risk to people when they open the cupboard or enter that confined area where the cylinders are being stored. Suffocation and possible death can occur within minutes, so it is definitely one gas to look out for if you have it on board. To control the risks of exposure to your crew and passengers, include the use, storage, and maintenance of CO2 cylinders in your risk assessment, emergency plans, and crew induction with the vessel's safety management system. Store CO2 cylinders in open, well-ventilated areas, and never store them in small rooms or cupboards without CO2 monitors. Check for leaks regularly and train crew on CO2 risks and emergency actions during induction and daily briefings. Consider installing gas monitors near the sources. Here is another simple risk assessment example that lists the hazards, controls, and who is responsible for tasks or actions that you can use to get started. As mentioned before, this is an example only and may not be applicable to your operation, but it'll get you started if you don't have anything in place. Okay. So now that we have covered what gases are potentially on your vessels, let's look at some things to consider when developing your risk assessment. Owners, masters and crew should work together to develop a risk assessment. Identify types and sources of hazardous gases on the vessel and consider how gas can be generated on board or enter from external sources from nearby vessels. Think about the severity and the consequences of exposure to hazardous gases on your vessels. Ask yourself, do you have procedures in place to manage hazardous gases already? Do you have equipment or devices to monitor gases on board? Do you have an emergency plan if there is a gas leak? And are your crew trained and aware of how to identify and manage gas exposure? Where to assemble, where not to go or enter? What are the rescue protocols and who to call for help? If the answers to most of these questions are no, then the potential severity and consequences will be high. You need a plan. Identify sources, equipment, appliances and systems, particularly sewage and plumbing, and areas on board that hazardous gases are either stored or have the potential to be created. Develop policies, procedures for known sources of stored gases on board your vessel. Think confined spaces or where leaked gases can accumulate. Develop maintenance procedures for sewerage and plumbing systems. And pump out sewage tanks after each voyage and start voyages with an empty sewage tank. Remove any fish from holds as soon as possible. Consider installing gas monitoring devices. Induct and train crew and educate hirers of Class 4 hire and drive vessels so they are prepared to deal with hazardous gas situations. Keep talking about it. Discuss the potential for hazardous gases exposure at crew meetings. And remind crew to look for the signs and report to the master immediately if they detect anything. Practice what to do in an emergency gas leak and log the training. And record all risks and controls in your safety management system. Now that we are almost at the end of our presentation, let us know in the chat what steps will you take after today's presentation. We would love to know. AMSA is conducting a nationwide focused inspection campaign on hazardous gases on domestic commercial vessels from the 2nd of February to the 30th of April in 2026. The purpose of this campaign is to ensure that vessel owners, operators and crew understand the risks associated with hazardous gases and are complying with the requirements under Marine Order 504 to effectively manage those risks. The focused inspection campaign specifically will focus on verifying that vessels have appropriate systems in place to identify, control and manage the risks posed by hazardous gases. Inspectors will check compliance with the risk assessment and procedure requirements of 504, where hazardous gases may pose an unacceptable risk, including documented risk assessment and associated procedures. They'll look at crew training on hazardous gas identification and response. They'll look out for appropriately placed signage on vessels and see if there's information provided to hirers of Class 4 vessels, and look for sufficient ventilation in toilets and confined spaces. Inspectors will undertake this focused inspection campaign in conjunction with regular DCV inspections. Where an inspector finds a deficiency in relation to hazardous gases, the inspector will discuss this with the person in charge of the vessel with a view to ensuring the vessel is brought into compliance. At the end of this campaign, the results will be analysed and a report prepared. This report will be published on the AMSA website. The findings will be used to identify whether further compliance and education activities are required. In the Q&A section, you can see a link to the additional information on the focused inspection campaign if you want to have a look. Okay, we have included a useful resources and links page in this presentation, so you will be able to click on the links for more information about what we have covered today. We'll now go through some of the questions in the Q&A chat and also answer some commonly asked questions. I'll pass over to Desley.
Thanks, Anita. Thanks everyone who's posted questions in the Q&A. I might read out some of those questions now and hopefully get Marco to provide the responses to those questions. Okay, how will I know if there is hydrogen sulphide in my vessel?
Thanks, Desley. You'll know if there's hydrogen sulphide on the vessel because there'll be a rotten egg smell. And this is when your emergency preparedness plan will come in as identified in your risk assessment. And you'll be wanting to have things in there like keeping clear of the area, cordoning it off, ventilating. Perhaps if you've got passengers, having a crew member there, making sure no one goes into the area. And then what you're going to do to there, perhaps return to shore and pump out the tanks or whatever's suitable for your operation.
Thank you. Okay, so is it safe to be in the swim deck area?
Yes, so the swim deck area is a platform low to the water at the stern of the vessel, used for entering and exiting the water for things like scuba diving. It's a known area where carbon monoxide can accumulate, and not an area to be around, obviously, when the engines are running. So your risk assessment could identify this and have controls in place. You may have signage there not to be there when the engines are running. You could have, as part of your induction, to induct your crew on the dangers, and as a procedure, a safety brief for the passengers not to linger in that area when the engines are running.
Okay, oh, that's good. So how do I treat carbon monoxide inhalation on a vessel?
Yes, so this will be a part of your emergency preparedness plan, which will be part of your which will come from your risk assessment, and it will include things like raising the alarm. You might want to alter course and change speed so no one else becomes affected. Get the person immediately into fresh air. If you've got oxygen on board, you'll be able to give them 100% pure oxygen, and immediately contact emergency services.
Okay, very good. Okay, so I've got a couple of questions just in regards to the focused inspections campaign. So on question 6 on the checklist tasks, if the vessel is fitted with or crew have access to hazardous gas monitoring devices, but it's not a direct Marine Order 504 requirement, during the FIC, if the risk assessment shows low risk and no detector is carried, will the inspector still mark question 6 as no, even though it's compliant?
Yes, so the marine inspector will still mark that as no, but it won't be a deficiency against the vessel. It's more of a data collection thing. So the hazardous gas monitor would be a control that may be necessary for identified in your risk assessment.
Right, and just another question in terms of the checklist as well too. So on question 3, the checklist asks if crew has undertaken induction, familiarisation or training on hazardous gases, for a small owner-operator with 2 casual deckhands, would a 5-minute verbal briefing that is recorded in the SMS and signed off in the logbook, will that be acceptable evidence?
Yes, that'll be acceptable evidence with some details on there on what they were briefed on related to the hazardous gases, as long as their names are in there, signed off and dated, and you need to keep hold of this for 5 years.
Very good. Okay, a couple more questions maybe here. Okay, so why does AMSA not just mandate gas detectors and alerting devices rather than just make a recommendation? Then you might want to consider installing them.
Okay, thanks, Desley. So this is, once again, the law as it stands at the moment. It comes down to your risk assessment, and yeah, I'd have to take that on notice.
Okay, good question though. All good questions. So I suppose just probably the last one is, will I receive a fine during the inspections?
No, the plan is not for you to receive a fine during the inspections. The idea is to be educational, and to, if you get any deficiencies, it would be with a view with working with the inspector towards rectifying the deficiency and bringing into compliance. And yeah, there won't only be any more serious deficiencies if there's an immediate safety risk on the vessel.
Yep. Thanks, Marco. That's some really good answers there and some really good questions. And of course, if anybody else has any further questions, by all means, send them through to us and we'll get those answered for you as soon as possible. Okay, we'd just like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. To help the team make sure our future webinars are of value for your time, we'd appreciate your feedback. So can you please take a moment to complete our survey? There should be a link in the chat now for you. Also, a copy of this presentation will be sent to everyone who's registered to the webinar, plus the presentation will be available on the AMSA website. We hope it becomes a useful resource for you and your crew, and you should be able to access that on the website anytime you like then. So before we go, I'd like to thank Anita for doing such a great job with the presentation, and Marco, thank you for assisting with the questions. Thanks everyone for attending today. Bye for now.